Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Walter's Wanderings Travel Podcast. I believe this is episode number 40 or thereabouts. I've kind of lost track, but that's okay. I guess I'm allowed to. It's May, and May is a great month for me because May is the month I became a travel advisor / dream creator and all of that. And so because it's my anniversary month, you are going to get the presents. Simply put, if you book a trip in May with Walter's Wanderings Travel and you complete your travel, I will send you either a $25 gift card to the establishment of your choice or a $50 future travel credit. The trip has to be 4 nights at least and $1,000 retail value, not including airfare and insurance. But otherwise, simple things to get to and simple to attain. And I'm happy to go ahead and help with your next vacation and help you start wandering. So again, $25 in a gift card, $50 in future travel credit once you travel, if you book in the month of May with Walter's Wanderings Travel. So today we have a very interesting guest on the show. His name is Phil Mews. He comes to us all the way from jolly old England, and he is jolly too. You can see the smile on his face, and well, that's if you're listening, you can't see the smile on his face, but I assure you it is there. But Phil has had some travel experiences in his life that are unique and one of a kind, and he's going to share them with us. So good day, Mr. Phil, and how are you?
Hello there. I'm really well, thank you. It's lovely to be speaking to you all the way from England, where it's very cold. Despite it being May, it's very cold today.
Well, we understand that. We know there are several of those phrases that pays, and one is the coldest spring you ever spend is in London, and the coldest summer you ever spend is in San Francisco. So I mean, I know how it goes. It's the way it's the lay of the land. But it will improve. You wait 10 minutes and something will happen. So you told me previously that you had a very interesting travel experience with the Saint Teresa of Calcutta, long before she became a saint. So why don't you tell everyone about what went down when you were in India?
So it was summer of 1996, and I just graduated from university in Newcastle in the north of England, and I decided I was going to go traveling for a year. So I decided at the last minute I was going to go to India, and I bought a one-way ticket to Delhi, from London to Delhi, and I was in India for about 3 months traveling. Had the most amazing experience. I did a course in Tibetan Buddhist meditation at the home of the Dalai Lama. Ironically, he was in the UK at the time that I was there. Up in Dharamsala in northern India, we got to spend time up in the foothills of the Himalayas, which was just amazing. And my trip to India culminated with me going to Calcutta, as it was then known, Kolkata. And I was brought up by my grandmother, which I'll tell you a little bit about later, who was very religious, and she used to raise a lot of money for Mother Theresa and send it over through her church. And I'd always wanted to meet her. I was absolutely fascinated by this woman, and I always wanted to meet her. So I just set it in my head, I'm going to go and meet Mother Teresa. And I got to Calcutta and I stayed at the Salvation Army hostel on Sudder Street, if my memory serves me right. And on the second day there, I met this amazing Japanese guy who was also staying there, called Hiro. His name was Hiro. And he was telling me that he was volunteering at one of the hospices for Mother Teresa that she ran. It was called the Kalighat Hospice. And I said, would I be able to come and help out? And he said, yeah, sure. So he took me along the next day and I went into the hospice, and nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. It was horrific. I mean, it was these people were being looked after in great conditions with a lot of care, but the poverty. Although I'd spent 3 months in India, nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. So it was an incredible life-changing experience. And then after the third day of volunteering there, Hero said to me, "Would you like to come to morning mass at Mother Teresa's chapel at her convent?" And I was like,
Twist
"Yeah."
my arm. Twist my arm. Exactly.
So we got up. I remember it was really early. I think we
Well,
had
sure it is. Oh,
we had
yeah.
about 7 a.m. or something.
Yeah, easily 5 or 6 a.m. Oh, sure. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was really early. I mean, I'm going back quite a few years now, but yeah, it was really early. And we went in and we took mass, and she came in. She was in a wheelchair at the time. I mean, bearing in mind, this was less than 12 months before she passed away.
Right.
She was very frail, but she was one of these people, although she was frail and she was in a wheelchair, when they brought her in, oh my goodness, her eyes lit up the room. Her eyes, there was just so much sparkle and love. That's the only way I could describe it. It was so much love in this woman's eyes. And I mean, I even get tingles on the back of my neck thinking about it now.
Sure.
And I could not believe, I was really emotional. Could not believe.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those moments when even if you're not prone to being starstruck, you are starstruck, but for the right reasons, you know?
Yeah, completely. And I just could not believe that I was in the presence of her. And then when we came to take our communion, and I went down to the communion rail, they wheeled her over to take her communion, and she stayed in her chair, and she was next to me. And I got to take my communion right next to her. And I just remember, I can't remember what I saw, because all I remember was the tears were streaming. I mean, you can see it's making me emotional remembering it now. And I was just I thought, I knew there, I am in the presence of someone incredibly special. And I was, I didn't think we'd get to meet her properly afterwards, but she came along. She shook, we went along past her and we shook her hand. And then it was when we got chatting to some of the other nuns, they said, "Tomorrow, would you like to come back for breakfast and have breakfast with Mother?"
Again, twist my arm. Yeah. I'll make room in my schedule for that.
Yeah. I was absolutely amazed by it. I mean, I just couldn't believe that this was happening to me. I'm from this little village in Weardale in County Durham in north of England, and I'm a farmer's son, and here I was in India going to have my breakfast with Mother Teresa. So it was a very formal beginning to, the next day we went along, and it was all very set out and formal, and she wasn't there straight away, and then they brought her in so we had our breakfast first, and then we got to meet her, and I got to shake her hand, and in my bum bag I had a little wooden crucifix with that had belonged to my grandmother and my mother, and it had a necklace attached to it. And I asked her to, and this was my comfort, this crucifix was my comfort, and I asked her if she would bless the crucifix. It was just a really simple wooden crucifix, and I said, "Would you bless it?" And she was like, "Of course I will." And she took it in her hands and she said a prayer. And it was that crucifix, when basically about 9 months later, when I was back in the UK, my grandmother who brought me up, she passed away. And I just instinctively knew that crucifix needed to go with her. So I placed that crucifix that Mother Teresa had blessed in my grandmother's coffin. But back to the breakfast with Mother Teresa, we got to chat to her. And I said to her, "I got told you'd been to my boarding school back in the 1970s. And she looked slightly confused because obviously she's been all over the world and goes
Right,
to
of
lots
course.
of places. And I said to her, she asked where the school was, and I told her and I explained that it was a boys' boarding school. And I said, perhaps you remembered the chaplain. And she looked at me and she says, did he have hair like grease back hair? And I said, yes, he did. And she goes, and glasses. And I said, yes, he did. That was him. And she went, I remember now. And she remembered going to the boarding school, to being at the service in the chapel long before I'd ever gone there. And she was incredible. She had a very dry sense of humor. She asked me what I thought of the hospice, of the work they were doing. I told her that I thought it was incredible, but I was very honest with her that I was finding it very difficult to deal with mentally. What I was seeing, the poverty, it was, and I was really honest with her, and she was really kind with me, and she said, it's not for everybody, but if you can't help in that way, if you decide that's not for you, there are other ways in which you can help, fundraising or spreading awareness. And we got about 25 minutes with her, but she was lovely. She was absolutely lovely and just one of those special moments. And you sort of come out of that meeting wondering, did it happen? I mean, this was before mobile phones,
Right. Sure.
selfies. I have not, and I have not got a photograph with her, but and I didn't take one of her because I just didn't feel it was appropriate.
I understand.
But I was there, and I know, and I thought, well, you know what? I can go to my grave knowing I've met her and I've spent time with her, and I engaged with her, and she engaged with me, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was just.
Well, and you also have Hiro from Japan who can certainly vouch for you, so you're all good. You're all good. You have eyewitnesses, so you're all good on that.
Exactly.
So you had another completely different experience dealing with a royal who is un-Teresa-like, if we could say so, in Princess Anne. And this is also an Asian story because you're obviously the Occidental tourist and you go to these places that are, Asian, which is great because we all like to be world travelers. So tell us about your encounter with Princess Anne, but more importantly, what happened before the encounter.
Okay, all right. I've not told my family this story, so this will be the first for them to hear it.
Well, it's good to spill your guts. We like that. Remember, it cleanses your soul. So let's hear.
I hope so, because there's a lot to atone for. What happened was after I left Calcutta, so I stayed. I only did one more day at Mother Teresa's hospice because one of my patients passed away, and it was really hard for me to deal with. And I just said, I can't deal with this. I need to move on and do something else. And the plan was always I was going to go and work in Hong Kong. And this was in the run-up. So this is the September 96. And this is in the run-up to the handover the following July back to from because Hong Kong was a British colony. And it was still under British governance, and it was handed back to China the following July in 97. So I'd gone to Hong Kong, and some of my friends from the north of England and the south had congregated in Hong Kong, and eventually we got a flat together. So I shared a flat with these two girls, two really good friends, Hannah and Kay, still good friends with now. And I was working in bars and nightclubs, so I had a bar job that I did during the day, and then I did 2 nights a week in a nightclub, working behind the bar, and then we also got on for extra money to save up for traveling with an agency that provided waiters and bar staff for events. So we started to do these little events, and we got booked for an event at this building, and I couldn't remember what it was. And we went out this night and got really, really drunk. Really drunk. We had been working really hard all week, and it was the middle of the week. But for us, it was like our equivalent to Saturday night. We got hideously drunk. I think we'd stayed up most of the night back at the flat. Carried on drinking back at the flat. Eventually got a few hours sleep, and then my alarm went off, and I remembered, oh crikey, we've got this booking for this catering event, and we can't let these guys down. And it was like I hadn't even ironed my shirt. We looked disheveled. I mean, my eyes were bloodshot. We turned up so there was 4 of us turned up for this job, and the supervisor gave us one look and went, "Oh my God, what state are you in?" And it was when we got to this new building that we'd realised, oh wow, this is the new British consulate that they've just built, ready in advance for the handover of Hong Kong to the Chinese. So the next thing I'm looking over in the corner of my eye, I think, is that Chris Patten, the governor of Hong Kong over there? Recognised him from the news. He's a British politician. And my friend Hannah said, yeah, it is. It's Chris Patten. So the next thing was, who's going to be here? Oh, we've got a VIP. It's Princess Anne. And I was like, we were in such a state. And at that time, they had no time to go and get any other staff. So we had to wait on on Princess Anne. Well, they gave me a tray of with about 15 champagne flutes with champagne in, and one of them was at the front, which had orange juice in, because apparently Princess Anne doesn't drink, or she doesn't drink at such occasions. And the orange juice was specifically for her. And the tray was originally given to my friend Corinne, but Corinne had been drinking all night with us, and she had the shakes so bad.
She begged off of that duty, and rightfully so.
The tray is not going to stay still.
No, so because they're top heavy anyway. The champagne flutes are top heavy when they're filled, so it's a real precarious thing to walk them over, even if you're completely sober. But if you're hungover, this is an extra challenge for you.
So I was like, I had to take the tray off Corinne, and I'm stood there with this tray of glasses while I can feel my hands are starting to shake. And the next thing, Princess Anne comes over and they lead her over, and I'm just thinking in my head, take the goddamn glass, take the glass away. Because as soon as I had given her glass of orange juice,
right,
I could then turn around to the other dignitaries and give champagne and perhaps even put the tray down. But I couldn't do anything until Princess Anne had been served.
Oh, of course.
My head was banging with hangover. And I just remember thinking, they're not going to believe this when we get back home to the UK. They're not going to believe a word of this. But it did. And when I do catch up with my friends who were there, and I'll say, did we really do that? And they go, yeah, we did. We served drinks to Princess Anne and the cream of British political society with absolute... When I say hangovers, I actually think we were still drunk because we'd only been to bed a few hours.
It hadn't washed out of your system yet. Sure, I understand.
But in my defense, I was 26 at the time.
Oh, sure, youth, indiscretion of youth. Yeah, we know about that. Trust me.
Now I am
a lot of indiscretion too, so don't worry about it.
I'm far more professional now. But yeah, that was a really bizarre.
Yeah, those are great stories, and they're so they're opposite. They're so opposite of each other. So I really enjoy that. I really do. Now, going back, you indicated that you wrote a book because, in many ways, I consider you what I call an overcomer, someone who's overcome a lot. And you can use that word if you wish. And you mentioned you were raised by your grandmother, which is obviously not so unique nowadays in our society, but certainly back when you were a child, it was probably more unique. So why don't you tell us, about being raised by your grandmother and the book you wrote and all of that?
Okay. So I grew up on a farm in the northeast of England, and the story really starts off about sort of summer of 1976, which in England that year was incredibly hot. It was one of the hottest summers on record. And we had this idyllic life. We had a sheep farm in the Durham Dales. And if you've ever seen the British TV show All Creatures Great and Small, the landscape where we live is identical to that. It's only that's only set about an hour's drive from here. So we were in this beautiful, picturesque setting. We had this beautiful farmhouse. We had animals, dogs. We had a river running through the bottom end of the farm. And there was myself. I was 6. My younger brother was 4, and my elder brother was 16. And there was the 3 of us and our 2 parents. And we had the most idyllic life. And then 18 months later, in November 1977, I went to bed one night as a 7-year-old and woke up during the night and heard movement, went through to my parents' bedroom, and my mother was sat in the bed crying and said, "I'm sorry, darling, your daddy's died." And she was just absolutely grief-stricken. And then the next day, I remember the next day I had to go to school, and I wasn't allowed to say anything to my little brother. He hadn't been told yet. And I had to pretend everything was normal. And then that weekend, I think so. Then the day after that, it was the weekend. I said to my mother, "Where is Daddy now?" And she says, "Oh, we've put him in the dining room at the end." We grew up in this 12th century farm. It was huge. And she said, "We put him in the dining room, darling." And I said, "I want to go and see him." And my mother was like, "That's not a good idea. You're only 7 years old." And I was like, "No, I want to see my dad." Now, I'd never knew what a coffin, we called coffins caskets, what one was. I don't know what I expected to see, but I got taken into the room to see my dad. And basically, I suffered. What I now know is I suffered post-traumatic stress disorder.
No doubt.
I know that now, yeah. And so within a couple of days, I started having dreams that my dad was like this scary ghost from Scooby-Doo who was coming to get me. And it absolutely terrified me. And the dreams were relentless. They didn't stop. And then 10 weeks after my father's death, my mother drove me to primary school one morning. So I was still 7. And she drove me to school and kissed me goodbye. And I never saw her again. And she'd taken ill that afternoon and was rushed to hospital. And she died that night. And she was only 43 years old.
Oh.
So she'd left behind myself, who was 7, my younger brother, Roger, who was 5, Richard, who was 18, and then my 2 grandparents, my mother's parents, who were both 70, about 70. They came along and they had to deal with the devastation that we.
Sure, the aftermath and all that. Oh my goodness.
So my grandmother and grandfather had to help my brother run the sheep farm, and Roger and I, my younger brother and I, were a 5-year-old and 7-year-old and left without any parents. And 6 months later, some friends of my dad's who were members of a Masonic charity said, "We will help the family stay together," because my grandparents were so old.
Right.
So I was given a charitable grant and they sent me away to boarding school. So I went away to boarding school for 10 years.
Wow.
And I got to come home every month and see my family. And then
that's just unbelievable. So you wrote about all of this.
Yeah, so I wrote. This is the book I wrote. So I wrote this about 2 or 3 years ago. That's it. You can see it. Orphan Boys. And originally the title was called Orphan Boy, and I decided I was going to write this story about my family as an exercise for myself. I didn't think it would be published or anyone would read it, but I did phone both my brothers to ask them if they would give their consent to me writing the story, because it was partly their story as well. And they said, "Yeah, you go for it, you do it." So I wrote the book, and it took me about a year. And then eventually we managed to get a publishing date set for it. And just as we'd set the publishing date, my younger brother Roger was found dead in his apartment in Mallorca in Spain, where he lived. And I'd lost my, although this is not actually us on the cover, the publishers used photo of two of the kids. My younger brother was my best friend, and I'd lost him, and obviously I had to put the book on hold for a little while. And then when we came to publish the book, I said, I'm going to change the title from Orphan Boy to Orphan Boys, because I felt I now had a responsibility to tell Roger's side of the story as well, as much as I could,
Sure.
and to honor his memory. So it was bittersweet, it was tough. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I can only imagine if something that takes a year to write means that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to process, and you want to put it down in exactly the right way.
Yeah.
Now, this book is available on all the usual book buying channels.
Yeah, it's available, and in the US, it's available Barnes and Noble stock it, and it's available on Amazon. It's available in Canada. It's been sold around the world, so yeah, you can find it pretty much anywhere. It's especially through Amazon. But yeah, it's sold reasonably well in the States, and it's I've had some lovely feedback from American readers, which is lovely.
Well, you get a glimpse of life in England too, and also your life. So it works out, wonderfully in that regard. There's no doubt. Well,
Yeah, it's a very positive book. It's a book full of hope and love. It's not what I would ever refer to as a misery memoir, because yes, there are tragic circumstances in it, but there is so much love and positivity in how we came as a family, how we came to terms with what we had to deal with, and took our lives forward, and that was really important.
That's the bottom line. You have to keep moving forward, because if you keep looking at the back, you'll hurt yourself basically, and in more ways than one. So, Phil, it's been unbelievable. I love your stories. I love all of your stories.
Thank you so much.
And I will certainly look up Orphan Boys on any of the regular book buying channels, or if you go to a retail bookstore. Yeah, there are still a few of those left. You can find it, or you can order it up there. I really appreciate you being on the show with me today, and I will be in touch with you as conditions warrant. So I thank you so much for being with us, Phil Mews, joining us today on the Walter's Wandering Travel Podcast. That'll do it for this edition. That's unbelievable stuff. I tell you, I find them everywhere. And listen, if you want to be on the Walter's Wandering Travel Podcast, just get in touch with Scott at walterswanderingtravel.com, because everyone has a travel story, and yours is no less important than anyone else's. Take care, have a great day, and we will